They now found themselves in a little thicket, which was perhaps more beautiful even than Christmas wood. It was so bright and sparkling. What was the most wonderful in it were these strange fruits that hung upon the trees, which were not only curiously coloured, but gave out a very kind of sweet odour. "Why, we are on Sweetmeat Grove," said the Nutcracker, "but yonder is the capital." And what a sight! How can I venture, children, to describe the beauty and the splendour of the city which now displayed itself to Maria's eyes, upon the broad, flowery meadow before them? Not only did the walls and towers glitter with the gayest colours, but the style of the buildings was like nothing else that could be found in the world. Instead of roofs, the houses had diadems set upon them, braided and twisted in the daintiest manners, and the towers were crowned with variegated trellis work, and hung with festoons the most beautiful that were ever seen. As they passed through the gate, which looked as if it were built of macaroons and candied fruits, silver soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocaded dressing gown threw himself upon the Nutcracker's neck with words, "Welcome, best prince, welcome to Confectionville." Maria was not a little astonished to hear young Drosselmeyer called a prince by such a distinguished man. But now she heard such a hubbub of little voices, such a huzzaing and laughter, and such singing and playing, that she could not think of anything else, and turned to the Nutcracker and asked him what it all meant. "Oh, worthiest Miss Stahlbaum, it is nothing uncommon. Confectionville is as populous and a merry city. Thus it goes here every day. Let us walk farther, if you please." They'd only gone a few steps when they came to the great marketplace, which presented a wonderful sight. All of the houses around were of sugared filigree work. Gallery was built over gallery, and in the middle stood a tall white obelisk, red and sugared in cream, while four curious sweet fountains played in the air, of orgeat, lemonade, mead and soda water, and in the great basin were soft bruised fruits, mixed with sugar and cream, and touched a little by the frost. But prettier than this were the charming little people, who by thousands pushed and squeezed and knocked their heads together, huzzayed, laughed, jested and sang, and who raised indeed that merry din which Maria had heard in the distance. Here were beautifully dressed men and women, Armenians, Greeks, Jews, Tyrolese, officers and soldiers, preachers, shepherds and harlequins, in short, all the people that could be possibly found in the world. In one corner the tumult increased, and the people rocked and reeled to clear the way, for just at that moment the Grand Mogul was carried in on a palanquin and attended by 93 grandees of the kingdom and 700 slaves. Now, on the opposite corner, the fishermen, 500 strong, were marching in procession, and it happened, very unfortunately, that the Grand Turk took into his head just then to ride over the river to the marketplace with 3,000 janissaries, and besides which a long train came from the festival of sacrifices, with sounding music singing, "Up and thank the mighty sun," and pushed straight on for the obelisk. Then what squeezing and pushing and rattling and clattering was heard. By and by a screaming was heard, for a fisherman had knocked off a Bahrim's head in the crowd, and the great Mogul was almost run over by a harlequin. The tumult grew wilder and wilder, and they commenced to beat and strike each other, when the man who, in the brocaded dressing gown, who'd called the Nutcracker a prince at the gate, clambered up by the obelisk, and having thrice pulled on a little bell, called out 3 times, "Confesseur! Confesseur! Confesseur!" The tumult was immediately appeased. Each one tried to help himself as well as he could, and after the confused trains and processions were set in order, and the dirt upon the great Mogul's clothes was brushed off, and the Bahraim's head put on again, the former hubbub began anew. "But what do they mean by confesseur, good Master Drosselmeyer?" asked Maria. "Ah, best Miss Stahlbaum," replied the Nutcracker, "by confesseur is meant an unknown but very fearful power, which they believe can do with them as he pleases. It is the fate that rules over this merry little people, and they fear it so much that the mere mention of the name is able to still the greatest tumult. Each one then thinks no longer of any earthly thing, of cuffs, kicks and broken heads, but retires within himself and says, "What are we, and what is our destiny?" Maria could not refrain from a loud exclamation of surprise and wonder, as all at once they stood before a castle glimmering with rosy light and crowned with 100 airy towers. Beautiful nosegays of violets, narcissus, tulips and dahlias were hung about the walls, and their dark glowing colours only heightened the dazzling, rose-tinted white ground upon which they were fastened. The large cupola of the central building and the sloping roofs of the towers were spangled with 1,000 gold and silver stars. "We are now in front of Marchpane Castle," said the Nutcracker. Maria was completely lost in admiration for this magical palace. Yet it did not escape her that one of the large towers was without a roof, while the little men were moving it about on scaffolding of cinnamon, as if busied in repairing it. But before she had time to inquire about it, the Nutcracker continued, "Not long ago, this beautiful castle was threatened with serious injury, if not with entire destruction. The giant Sweet Tooth came in this way and bit off the roof of yonder tower, and was gnawing upon the great cupola, when the people of Confectionville gave him up a full quarter of the city, and a considerable portion of Sweetmeat Grove as a tribute, with which he contented himself, and went on his way." At this moment soft music was heard, and the doors of the palace opened, and 12 little pages marched out with lighted cloves, which they carried in their hands like torches. On each of their heads was a pearl. Their bodies were made of rubies and emeralds, and they walked upon feet cast out of pure gold. 4 ladies followed them, almost as tall as Maria's Clara, but so richly and splendidly dressed that she saw in a moment that they were princesses born. They embraced Nutcracker in the tenderest manner, and cried with joyful sobs, "Oh, my prince, best prince, oh, my brother!" Nutcracker seemed very much moved. He wiped the tears out of his eyes, and then took Maria by the hand, and said with great emotion, "This is Miss Maria Stahlbaum, the daughter of a much respected and very worthy physician. She is the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her shoe at the right time, had she not supplied me with the sword of the pensioned colonel, I should now be lying in my grave, torn and bitten to pieces by the terrible Mouse King. View her, gaze upon her, and tell me if Pirlipat, although a princess by birth, can compare with her in beauty, goodness, and virtue. No, I say, no!" And all the ladies cried, "No!" and then fell upon Maria's neck, exclaiming, "Oh dear, preserver of the prince, our beloved brother, charming Miss Maria Stahlbaum!" She now accompanied these ladies and the Nutcracker into the castle, and entered a room, the walls of which were bright coloured crystal. But of all the beautiful things which Maria saw there, what pleased her most were the nice little chairs, sofas, secretaries, and bureaus with which the room was furnished, and which were all made of cedar or Brazil wood, and ornamented with golden flowers. The princesses made Maria and Nutcracker sit down, and they would immediately prepare something for them to eat. They then brought out a great many little cups and saucers, and plates and dishes, and all the finest porcelain, and spoons and knives and forks, graters, kettles, pans, and other kitchen furniture, all of gold and silver. Then they brought the finest fruits and sugar things, such as Maria had never seen before, and began in the nicest manner to squeeze the fruits with their little snow-white hands, and to pound the spice and grate the sugar almonds. In short, so to turn and handle everything, that Maria could see how well the princesses had been brought up, and what a delicious meal they are preparing. As she desired very much to learn such things, she could not help wishing to herself that she might assist the princesses in their labour. The most beautiful of the Nutcracker sisters, if she had guessed Maria's secret thoughts, reached out her golden mortar, saying, "Oh, sweet friend, dear preserver of my brother, will you not pound a little sugar candy?" While Maria pounded in the mortar, Nutcracker began to give a full account of his adventures, of the dreadful battle between his army and that of the Mouse King, and how he had lost it by the cowardice of his troops, how the terrible Mouse King lay in wait to bite him in pieces, and how Maria, to preserve him, gave up many of his subjects who had entered his service, and all just as it had happened. During this narration, It seemed to Maria as if his words became less and less audible, and the pounding of her mortar also sounded more and more distant, until she could scarcely hear it. Presently she saw a silver gauze before her, in which the princesses, pages, Nutcracker, and herself too were all enveloped. A singular humming and rustling and singing was heard, which seemed to die away in the distance. And now Maria was raised up as if upon mounting waves, higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher. The conclusion. Per puff it went. Maria fell down from an immeasurable height. That was a fall, but she opened her eyes, and there she lay upon her little bed. It was a bright day, and her mother stood by her, saying, "How can you sleep so long? Breakfast has been ready this great while." You now perceive, kind readers and listeners, that Maria, completely confused by the wonderful things which she had seen, had at last fallen asleep in the room at Marchpane Castle, and that the Moors, all the pages, or perhaps even the princesses themselves, must have carried her home and laid her softly in her bed. "Oh, mother, dear mother, you cannot think where young Master Drosselmeyer led me last night. Oh, what beautiful things I have seen!" And she began and told the whole almost as accurately as I have related it, and while her mother listened in astonishment. When she finished, her mother said, "You've had a long and very beautiful dream, but now drive it all out of your head." Maria insisted upon it, and that she had not dreamed it, but she'd actually seen what she'd related, and when her mother led her into the sitting room to the glass case, took Nutcracker out, who was standing as usual upon the second shelf, said, "Silly child, how can you believe that this wooden Nuremberg puppet can have life or motion?" "But dear mother," replied Maria, "I know little Nutcracker is a young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew." And then her father and mother laughed heartily. "Oh, dear father," said Maria, almost crying, "you should not laugh so at my Nutcracker. He's spoken very well of you, for when we entered Marchpane Castle, and he presented me to his sisters, the princess, he said you were a much respected and very worthy physician." At this the laughter was still louder, and Louise and even Fred joined in. Maria then ran into the chamber and took out the 7 crowns of the Mouse King out of her little box, and brought it in, and handed them to her mother, saying, "See, dear mother, here are the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, which young Master Drosselmeyer gave me last night as a token of his victory." Her mother examined the little crowns in great astonishment. They were made of a strange but very shining metal, and were so delicately worked it seemed impossible that mortal hands could have formed them. Her father likewise could not gaze enough at them, and he insisted very seriously that Maria should confess how she obtained them. But she could give no account of them, and kept firm to what she had said, and that as her father spoke very harshly to her, and even called her a little storyteller, she began to cry bitterly. "Oh, what then shall I say?" At this moment the door opened, and the counsellor entered and exclaimed, "What is this? What is this?" The doctor told him of all that had happened, and showed him the little crowns. As soon as the counsellor cast his eyes on them, he cried and laughed. Stupid pack! These are the very crowns which I used to wear on my watch chain years ago, which I gave to little Maria on her birthday when she was 2 years old. Don't you remember them?" Neither father nor mother could remember them, but when Maria saw that her parents had forgotten their anger, she ran to Godfather Drosselmeyer and said, "Ah, you know all about it, Godfather Drosselmeyer. Tell them yourself that my Nutcracker is your nephew, young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, that it was he that gave me the crowns." The counsellor's face turned very dark and grave, and he muttered, Stupid pack. Upon this, the doctor took a little Maria upon his knee and said very seriously, "Listen to me, Maria, once and for all. Drive your foolish dreams and nonsense out of your head. If I ever hear you say again that the silly, ugly Nutcracker is the nephew of your godfather Drosselmeyer, I will throw him out of the window and all the rest of your puppets, Miss Clara not excepted." Poor Maria doesn't know how to speak of all the wonders, but she thought of so much more. Her soul was full of them, for you may imagine that these things so fine and beautiful as those which she has seen are not easily forgotten. Even Fred turned his back on his sister whenever she spoke of the wonderful kingdom in which she had been so happy, and it is said he would sometimes still mutter between his teeth, "Silly goose!" But that I can hardly believe of so an amiable and good-natured fellow. This is certain, however, he no longer believed a word of what Maria had told him. He made a formal apology to his hussars on public parade for the injustice that he had done to them, and stuck their cap feathers of goose quill much finer and taller than those with which they had been deprived, and permitted them again to blow the Hussars' Grand March. Aha! We know best how it stood with their courage when those fateful balls spotted their red coats. Maria was not allowed then to speak any more of her adventures, but the images of that wonderful fairy kingdom played about in her sweet, rustling tones. She could bring them all back again whenever she fixed her thoughts steadfastly upon them, and hence it came that instead of playing, as she formerly did, she would sit silent and thoughtful, musing within herself, for which reason the rest would often scold her and call her a little dreamer. Some time after this, it happened that the counsellor was busy repairing a clock in Dr. Stahlbaum's house. Maria sat close by the glass case and, lost in her dreams, was gazing at Nutcracker when the words broke from her lips involuntarily. "Ah, Master Drosselmeyer, if you are actually living, I would not behave like Princess Pirlipat and slight you, because for my sake you would cease to be a handsome young man." At this the counsellor screamed, "Hey, hey, stupid pack!" Then there was a clap and a knock so loud that Maria sank from her chair with a swoon. When she came to herself, her mother busied about her and said, "How came such a great girl to fall from her chair? Here's Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew, just arrived from Nuremberg. Come, behave like a little woman." She looked up, and the counsellor had put on his glass wig again and his brown coat. He was smiling very pleasantly, and he held by the hand a little young man, very well shaped. His face was as white as milk and as red as blood. He wore a handsome red coat, trimmed with gold, and shoes with white silk stockings. In a buttonhole he stuck a nosegay. His hair was nicely powdered and curled, and down his back there hung a magnificent queue. The sword by his side seemed to be made out of nothing but jewels. It flashed and sparkled so brightly that the little hat which he carried under his arm looked as if it were overlaid with soft silken flakes. It very soon appeared how polite and well bred this young man was, for he had brought Maria a great many handsome playthings, the nicest gingerbread, and the same sugar figures that the Mouse King had bitten to pieces. And for Fred he had brought a splendid sabre. At table the little fellow cracked nuts for the whole company. The hardest could not resist him. With the right hand he put them up to his mouth, and with the left he pulled hard on his cue, and crack! The nut fell in pieces. Maria had turned very red when she first saw the handsome young man, and after she became redder still, when after dinner young Drosselmeyer invited her to go with him to the sitting-room, to the glass case. "Play prettily together, children. I have nothing against it, since all my clocks are going," said the counsellor. Scarcely was Maria alone with young Drosselmeyer when he stooped upon a knee and said, "Oh, my very best Mr. Stahlbaum, you see here at your feet the happy Drosselmeyer whose life you saved on this very spot. You said most amiably that you would not slight me like the fateful Princess Pirlipat, if I become ugly for your sake. From that moment I ceased to be a miserable Nutcracker and resumed my old, and I hope not disagreeable figure. Oh, excellent Miss Stahlbaum, make me happy with your dear hand. Share with me the crown and kingdom. Rule with me in Marchpane Castle, for still I am king there." Maria raised the youth and said softly, "Dear Master Drosselmeyer, you are a kind and good-natured young man, and since you rule in such a charming land, among such pretty, merry people, I will be your bride." With this, Maria immediately became Drosselmeyer's betrothed bride. After a year and a day he came, as I have heard, and carried her away in a golden chariot drawn by horses. There danced at the wedding 22,000 of the most splendid figures, adorned with pearls and diamonds. And Maria, it is said, is at this hour queen of a land where sparkling Christmas woods, transparent marchpane castles, in short, where the most beautiful, the most wonderful things can be seen by all of those who will only have eyes for them. The Nutcracker. The end. Well, I hope that was a good Christmas story for you all. It certainly seemed to have some interesting imagery there. I'm surprised actually we didn't see more of the fight between the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, but maybe that was considered too gory, unlike some of the other things in there. Anyway, I hope this has been pleasant for yourselves. Have a very Merry Christmas and look after yourselves, keep wearing your masks, and hopefully get your booster vaccine soon. Take care, everybody. See you soon.